welcome to Full-Time Review. It is presented by Amazon Business. I'm your host, Jillian Sakovitz. There's a lot to get into in this one, so let's get into it. I am lucky enough to now bring in Tamerra Griffin. Hello, Tamerra.
Hey, how is it going? I was so sad we just barely missed each other in the Bay.
I know. I was in the Bay for Messi. You were in the Bay for what transpired over the weekend, so we have a lot to catch up about. Let's set the scene on Saturday night. This was a meeting between the two California teams, both with a connection to Savy King. There were a number of tributes. It started off as a really meaningful night. Can you set the scene for us, Tamerra?
Totally. I mean, as a California native, I already had this game sort of circled on my calendar and was planning to cover it for months. Then, of course, last week, the unfortunate news of Savy King's collapse and hospitalization, the procedure that she had after doctors detected the heart abnormality when she was admitted to the hospital last week after collapsing during that home game against Utah. Of course, Savy King was the number 2 draft pick with Bay FC last season. She herself is also a California native, so there was a weird kind of tragic poetry to it all. The fact that Angel City's first game after such a traumatic event happened to be a team that Savy also had a lot of ties to, which in some ways made the fact that both teams wore those black SK3 t-shirts make even more sense. Angel City was also wearing the black wristbands, so there was no way to miss that this was a huge opportunity for both teams to come together, and you'll always hear players say that in those moments, it's just bigger than football. So it was really, really cool to see that. But it ended up being that was just one of many things going on in that game. Going into it, though, it was clear that was going to be one of the major, major focal points. On top of the fact that NWSL Commissioner Jessica Berman also attended that game. It was announced midway through last week that she was going to be there, making herself available to the media at halftime during the game. There were a lot of layers to this one. Right.
And we also saw the commissioner there with the NWSL partner brand beverage, Unwell.
Yes. So that had been announced earlier this year. Berman was at the She Believes Summit in LA, announced that this partnership was going to be happening to very mixed reviews. If we're keeping it light, people had a lot of questions about this. You don't often hear of these sort of top-down corporate sponsorships in sports, especially when it comes to a supporters group. Usually they're tied to individual teams, not an entire league. As many neutrals as you might find in the NWSL. People had a lot of questions, understandably. And there were a lot of questions as to why Alex Cooper, the CEO and founder of Unwell, chose this particular game to launch the partnership. Of course, this had been decided long before the Savy King news came about. But when I'm talking about those layers, in addition to everything that we just explained, this was also the official launch of the Unwell FC NWSL partnership. Unwell FC being the fan hype group that Alex Cooper plans to sort of tour around the NWSL throughout the season. So this will just be one of many games that she will be popping up at.
When I will admit this, when I woke up in the morning and saw the photos, it was a lot of layers, to your point. There were pictures of Commissioner Jessica Berman and Alex Cooper hugging with the Unwell beverage. There were beautiful pictures of both sides sporting the armbands, the t-shirts like you mentioned. And then the third layer being this video clip, Tamerra, of you speaking to Jess Berman at her media availability at halftime.
Yeah. So I personally, as a journalist, was pretty surprised to hear that Commissioner Berman was going to be available to the media. I personally have never participated in a halftime press conference. So in terms of just coverage and logistics, there was a lot to keep track of because the game itself was interesting. Bay FC went up 2-0 at halftime, which I don't think many people were expecting. Bay's been struggling. Angel City's been in a really fantastic run of form up until that game. And so then we find ourselves thrust into the middle of a press conference in the middle of the game, talking about Unwell, talking about the Savy King situation and the medical response and the league's responsibility in that, because the league has since said that they actually don't think that the game should have continued as it did and has made a lot of vows and promises to improve their procedures in the future so it doesn't happen again. I had and a lot of other media had a lot of difficult questions for the commissioner in that press conference. We're all aware that we only have 15 minutes at most, the length of the of halftime, but she made herself available. And when I asked a question that I felt she was not answering sufficiently, especially given the fact that it had been over a week since the incident had taken place, especially since this whole past week had been filled with statements and updates to stories and language that doesn't always get to the heart of the matter, in my opinion, I had to push back. That is my journalistic obligation. We need to tell stories. We need to get to the bottom of the truth. And that, I think, is the moment that sort of caught people's attention, because I needed to remind her that you are the commissioner. And it is, in fact, important to be able to pinpoint what happened and when and who was involved at which points in the process, if mistakes were made.
Sure.
I don't know how else you diagnose the problem.
Absolutely. A review, is always in order. But Tamerra, let's take a quick listen to that audio clip.
On the topic of medical procedures, following the ambulance's transportation of Savy King to the hospital, was a replacement ambulance called to the stadium before the game restarted?
I would have to double check on that because I wouldn't want to answer that specific question without confirming.
Can I ask a follow-up since that was... certainly appreciating the difference in time zone between when kickoff was and where most of the rest of the world lives, it seems. I'm curious if you were awake for that game and whether or not, if you were not awake, you were called that night to be informed about what happened.
Yeah, I think as we've reviewed the situation, I don't think it's constructive to recount who did what and when.
Respectfully, you're the commissioner of the league.
Yes, and our focus really has been on ensuring that all of our medical procedures were followed and that on a go-forward basis, the game would not continue and it won't in the future.
So Tamerra, now that you've had a little bit of time since that halftime availability for the commissioner, what's been your biggest takeaway?
Radical transparency is what will grow this game, ultimately. I think that we run into problems. I think that orange at best flags need to be raised when we shy away from difficult questions and difficult conversations. Like I said, we are journalists. Our obligation is to get to the heart of the truth. That was a traumatic incident. And you could argue that it was made more traumatizing because the players were made to resume play. Mm-hmm. Yes, of course, the league has since walked back their decision and admitted that they made a mistake, that they got it wrong. But we need to really, if we are going to subject players, if we're going to subject the people at BMO Stadium who were still at that game, if we are to subject the people who were tuning in, following along, even if they weren't in Los Angeles at the time, to what happened, we also owe it to them to walk through every single detail of how this problem is being diagnosed and how it's going to get better. It's not enough for me to just say that things are going to get better. I think it's worth lifting up the lid and showing exactly what went wrong, because that is also how you sort of process what happened from an emotional standpoint. That's also how you build trust moving forward. And that is where I think we are hopefully working toward, like as a collective. You know, sure. I view the NWSL as an ecosystem. There are so many different pieces and parts that make this a harmonious sort of environment. It was uncomfortable, and it still is, but I have always been a proponent of necessary discomfort. So I'm ready for more of it, especially if it means this game and this league is getting into a better place.
And I think you hit the nail on the head with necessary discomfort. And perhaps it's naive of me to think that we had this conversation as a group when we were all together in New York, right? Like, what is the NWSL now? And I think we all agreed on that NWSL is an NWSL 3.0. 2.0 would be the pre-Berman era of lack of accountability, cover up sexual misconduct, a lot of issues within the league. Things that prompted Megan Rapinoe to tweet, I think blow it all up. And to me, I had that's it, that is not NWSL 3.0. And I found Jessica Berman, respectfully, I found the commissioner's reaction to be shockingly NWSL 2.0 behavior of insulting people's intelligence, pulling the wool over the eyes, as if we're not all here and our brains aren't operating. Like, say you were asleep. And I'm not saying she was, but if she was awake, she'd say she was awake. NBA Commissioner Adam Silver, and NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell, MLS Commissioner Don Garber, I can bet money on, are not awake for every West Coast game through the entirety of their seasons. And that's okay. Right? Like, that's okay. And the only thing I can assume, even think, that the dodginess is like, is there some legality to it, being that it's a medical issue? Because for a league that said, we're going to review this, and then for Jessica Berman to sit there and say to you, well, why go backwards? Answer the question. Just answer the question. To me, it was so insulting. And for a commissioner who's overseen so much positive in this new era, the historic broadcast deal, initiating the CBA ahead of schedule, expanding to 15 teams, this was shocking behavior. And I'm being really honest. Maybe it was just a lack of being prepared for that question, but that's even more surprising. I don't know. Listen, everyone can get caught off their guard. Everybody can. And there is coming back for this for me. But get on Twitter tomorrow or get on somewhere tomorrow and say, hey, I messed up and here's why. And you know what went through my head in San Jose, Tamerra's, like, when I showed up to my hotel in San Jose midweek, my hotel was overbooked. So it was midnight. It was midnight on the Pacific coast. And there was no hotel room. That is not a life or death situation. However, because all of my colleagues on the East Coast at 3 o'clock in the morning were sleeping, as they do, there was an on-call number. So you get a bunch of beepers and you all create an on-call system and you admit that you didn't have it because you know what? There was no fatality in this. It all could have been worse. And you say, we didn't have that system and now we do. And again, that is my guess in all of this, but that's what you're screaming when you're being kind of so evasive. I found it offensive and I apologize. I'm a big fan of the commissioner, but this was a huge letdown by her.
Yeah, I mean, credit to her for the media availability in the first place. And I think a lot of us ended up making an assumption that it was either going to be very stringent, maybe 5 minutes total, or she's just going to be speaking at us and not taking questions. We were not really given details about how it was going to go. But once we got a sense of the fact that we could ask her anything, there was also, for me, an expectation of a certain level of preparation. And that did not necessarily end up proving the case based on how she responded to some of the questions, not just my own, but those of my fellow media colleagues who were also in that room. Necessary discomfort, like we said. I agree. There's nothing wrong with being asleep, but there is something wrong with not being willing to admit that a week in, when you're also talking about making improvements on mistakes that were made. You can't have it both ways. You have to be able to articulate the mistakes and how you're going to eradicate them and make sure that they aren't repeated. So I think these next few days are going to be very telling in terms of how Berman and the league front office deals with this, because it was very exposing. It was very exposing.
Absolutely. All right, Tamerra, thank you so very much for your time. If you haven't read it yet, you can go check out this article from Tamerra at The Athletic, and so very much more. Thank you, Tamerra.
Thanks, Jill. Here's hoping we can cross paths in the Bay next time.
Yes. After we saw Crystal Palace collect their first ever major trophy on the men's side in the FA Cup final over Manchester City on Sunday on the women's side, it was Chelsea and Manchester United at Wembley. Chelsea with a dominating 3-0 win, courtesy of a Sandy Baltimore brace and a goal from Kat Macario. Macario in this one becoming the third U.S. women's national team player to score in a women's FA Cup final in the last decade, after Carly Lloyd did it in 2017 and Sam Mewis did it in 2020. Sonia Bonpastor's side completes the domestic treble. For more on that, we bring in the Athletics' Megan Feringa.
All right, I'm now joined by Megan Feringa from a very loud Wembley Stadium. Megan, how are we doing?
Hello.
Oh, good. Yeah, it's loud. It's noisy. Chelsea are historically undefeated, 30 games, I think, now in the WSL, FA Cup, and League Cup. So it's a very, very blue day at Wembley.
It's a blue
Well, in a
day.
good way.
Year. It's a good, yeah.
Blue year.
Happy blue. Happy blue.
Happy blue. Happy blue
Manchester
year.
United were the reigning champions. They have now lost their title, and Chelsea are back on top in the FA Cup. How did they do it? 3-0, Megan. It was pretty easy, wasn't it, for Chelsea?
Yeah, it was. I wouldn't call it comprehensive, only because this was definitely not the most fun game to watch. But roughly after about 15 minutes, it kind of only felt like there was one direction that this game was going to go. But before halftime, honestly, I thought maybe, okay, United could regroup. Who's going to know what's going to happen in the second half? But then Celine Bissett, just a really silly foul against Erin Cuthbert in the penalty area. And yeah, once Baltimore sort of converted her penalty, there was only one way it was going to go. Which, honestly, this FA Cup final, if there's one player that sort of defined it, it's Sandy Baltimore.
You mentioned the penalty that Bissett gave away. Do you think that was the key moment of the game? That's when everything changed at 0-0? United maybe had a chance?
I personally think so. I mean, Chelsea were probably the better side, but only like marginally, I'd say. Actually, for the first 15 minutes, United looked really good. And, you know, these games ultimately get decided by a very, very small margin. United are the defending champions. You think they have a little bit more about them to know, hey, you probably should try to chop someone down, stick a leg out that high in the penalty area. It was a very, very silly mistake. And I think once that happens, you're not really going to come back from that.
And take me to Wembley, Megan. Chelsea have had a few accusations of being boring this year and not maybe celebrating their title, their 6th in a row in the WSL as hard as they could have, or as hard as people wanted them to. But taking back the FA Cup from Manchester United, being at Wembley in front of 85,000 people, what are you seeing from the players? What are you seeing from the scene about what this means to Chelsea?
Erin Cuthbert, just before we got on here, Erin Cuthbert sort of spoke to the fans. And if anyone's not heard Erin Cuthbert speak, it's probably the most rousing. I mean, like, it just feels like all of your insides want to just start to do something. You don't know what it is, but you're like, I will do whatever Erin Cuthbert tells me to do. But these players, you can tell it means the world to them because they effectively got 3 out of 4 trophies. But to win the domestic, I mean, just basically to conquer England in the manner that they did, I think that is the smallest. I mean, it's a win. It's a huge win for them because to not go to the Champions League final and to not make it, to not do what basically Sonia Van Basten was brought in to do is going to hurt. But then to go and conquer England in this manner, it's a big kind of middle finger to the loss of the Champions League. It's a way of saying, no, if we can't be winners in Europe, we're at least going to be the best winners that England have ever seen. So you can see it right now. You know, Millie Bright, Erin Cuthbert, who were writing, they're all celebrating, they're all hugging. The Chelsea fans haven't left; they're all still in their seats. Whereas you've got the Man United section, which is almost completely empty now. So this is a huge victory, and there should be nothing taken away from that.
A blue year, a blue Saturday, a blue FA Cup final. Like you said, one of the greatest champions we've ever seen in England. Megan, thanks so much for jumping on the pod straight from Wembley Stadium.
Thanks, Theo. I hope y'all can hear me.
Just about. Cheers.
Yeah.
Before we get out of here, did you know that The Athletic has partnered with Yahoo Sports to provide free best-in-class coverage of women's sports? Yep. Check out the Women's Sports Hub at sports.yahoo.com/women-sports. My name is Jillian Sakovitz. Thank you so very much for listening to Full Time Review. We hope you enjoy it.